Okay, good evening. Um, First of all, I want to, commend you all for staying in touch and getting the work done. A few of you I haven't heard from very often, or not at all, even. Just before I begin with the discussion here, I want to make sure that you understand that the course is really designed and it's difficultly designed, and I have a lot of leeway with this that it is hard to get this done and stay on top of it. And you have a lot of things going on. So if you're running into difficulties getting this finished and staying on top of the work, contact me because I can always adjust the material as I need to and make sure that we're finding a space for you to be your most successful. But if I don't hear from you, you're getting zeros in places where I don't really want to do that. My goal is not that, right? My goal is to have you, or to help you, I should say, become more successful as a student in one way, but really just again to enjoy poetry. So, if you haven't gotten me your response journal or your Zoom reading for the Whitman poem, which a number of you haven't done that one, please contact me. Let me know what's going on, and we will make sure for at least this first week that we remain flexible and work with a schedule that makes sense. Other than that, again, if you have feedback about anything regarding the videos, the material, or anything like that one, do let me know and I'll work that out with you. With that said, I'm going to jump into the next part of the videos today, which we're going to be dealing with Ada Limon's text, right? Bright Dead Things came out in, I want to say 2016. That may even be 2015. My apologies. I actually just looked at that and I forgot it. So 2015. So 5 years ago, and of course, as you know, a lot of things have changed in the past 6 months, much less the past week, even really. And with that said, I hope you're all safe. I really do. Please be safe in this time if that's an option that exists for you. And so a lot of things have happened, but I still think a lot of her work is really true to our situation today and what we're trying to talk about and discuss. And in the book itself, Bright Dead Things went on to win a number of major awards. And Ada Limon's next book came out, and it is, it's still coming out with a lot of acclaim. I find that many of my students really enjoy her book, and the language is clear. It's very much in a vernacular that's going to be conversational. The poetry is not really trying to push you away. It's much more trying to take you in, say, listen to me, hold me, and I'll hold you back. So in that way, I find the poetry to be an interesting poetry. It's still complicated and still layered, but still like a surface level that we can read and get quite a bit out of. A lot of things we could talk about with this particular book. I'm going to look at one poem from the first section with you today to talk about. According to our syllabus, we're looking at videos dealing with Bright Dead Things, close reading revisions, and the enumerative bibliography. The enumerative bib, as well as the in-text citation and plagiarism, that's going to be a separate assignment entirely. I'm sorry, excuse me, a separate video. So I'll mention research in here, but just briefly. And more than anything else, I'm going to be discussing the poetry and the the close reading and revisions, and how do you continue to work. So the most common thing that I'm seeing in your responses, and this is a very common thing, and I just want us to learn to move past a couple of things very quickly, is let's stop worrying about the reader. I see this a lot, right? They use this image or whatever to connect with the reader or to let the reader see. And this is like an ideal reader that doesn't really exist. And because it doesn't exist, we can't actually prove anything about it. And our goal, right, with rhetoric and with composition is always to be able to prove what we're trying to say. So there's no perfect reader out there. There's you, right? There's you who can read, and me who can, and I can read what you read. So we want to always say, instead of the reader, we always want to talk about the speaker of the poem or the poem itself. And when we stay in the poem, we're forced then to prove our comments, right? That's really what we want to do. And on that note, the other thing that I'm seeing, not often, but I'm still seeing it, is words like seem, maybe, perhaps, could be. These words are what we might call the subjunctive tense. So in other words that don't actually say anything, but what they're trying to do is suggest maybe it's this, maybe it's not. And what I want you to do is to be bold. Say, this is what this means, and then prove it. If you can learn to do that, you may be wrong. Let's be okay with that. Let's just accept that wrong exists in this world. But it's not wrong in any sort of mathematical sense, right? We're not solving for X with poetry. So I want you to get more and more comfortable with recognizing the fact that it's okay to say something and try to prove it, because if I can see what you're trying to prove and how you're trying to prove it, then I can offer you advice. If you're just saying maybe, it could be, this could happen with the reader, could feel this way, I can't help you out with that, because all of that's really up in the air. It's very ethereal, and I want us to stay grounded, right? Poetry seems like it's ethereal, seems like it's unapproachable in a critical sense, but actually it's not. It just requires some evidence from you in with your close reading. So work on that. And that, if you can learn to do that, if you can learn to do that now, your work in every class that you take is going to continually escalate. And beyond that, right, college is a very short amount of your life. So after this, what we want to be able to do is to be bold, be specific, be precise, communicate clearly, effectively. And that's what we're really trying to do with education. So I hope that some of this will be helpful for you as we go forward. With all of that said, I'm going to jump into the text a little bit and talk to you about some close reading examples and to make sense of a few things as we go forward. So I'm starting again with Bright Dead Things here, and I'm going to be looking at section 1. So the first thing I want to do, as always, is I want to think about the text and the title of the text, Bright Dead Things. So I have 3 words here, right? I have 2 adjectives, okay, ending with a noun, all right? And we can talk about each one individually, because all of these are things that maybe we want to look for, or not maybe, we want to look for how the book and the individual poems within the book are helping us understand this kind of complicated idea, right? This complicated image. The first thing we have in this title, right, is the word bright. Okay, so it's really hard to see the word bright as anything but a positive image, right? Bright is, if we think about it as an abstraction, that person is a very bright person. That was a bright response. We inherently mean, intelligent, on point, or we could even mean it as a kind of joyfulness. You have a very bright personality. So it's hard to really use the word bright in a negative sense. So in and of itself, the word bright, incredibly positive. It also suggests in this a kind of light, right? Very specifically, it deals with light, meaning, and not, light as in like sun, as in this incredibly bright ceiling fan light that I don't know how to get out of the shot. And I don't know how, I just don't try. So it's about this, right? It's about having like a halo, being bright, almost a kind of holiness with it, if we wanted to keep on in that sense. And then immediately following that, right, we have the word dead. So there probably isn't, the most, right, if we were thinking about antithesis or what the opposite of bright is, we might say like a dull, dark, unlit, right? We could play with this. And I think the idea of dead, right, is very much the opposite of what is bright. We very rarely think of dead as having brightness. In fact, the absence of light might be what we call dead, especially if you just think about like a light bulb, right? Like, this is bright. If it was dead, it would most certainly not be descriptive as bright. So she's dealing with oxymorons here, or kind of paradox, right? 2 things that don't belong together, typically speaking, in the way we describe something. So already we have in this a sense of like, what doesn't match up, what isn't connected, and why is she playing with these things as we go forward? And then finally, she lands on things. So things in and of itself is actually, I don't know, it's kind of an abstraction. It's an image, but it's not clear what that means, because it is in fact a very generalized image. It's not actually specific in any real way. Things could be literally anything. That's kind of the joy of them. It could be anything. So we're having a very generalized title here at the end, but it's described in 2 very specific ways. So I have specificity of joy, specificity of brightness, specificity of lack of joy, death, and then generality of whatever, right? So we're going to try to figure out what she's talking about inside of this experience, but there's a lot to talk about even to begin with. Now, with that said, as I open the text and I go into it, I see I have 4 sections, so that's kind of nice. So she's breaking stuff up, trying to make sure that we understand. Maybe there's a cumulative aspect to the book. Does it build? Does it move? And I think we'll see that it does. And then we arrive here, right, on this page, right? This is what we call an epigraph. An epigraph is a quote from another source where we're supposed to understand the quote as sort of leading us into I don't know the exact right word I want to use right now, but it gives us a sense of an umbrella, okay, that we can put this text under. It's saying, think about these ideas, because the book is thinking about these ideas. And this particular quote comes from the poet Larry Levis. Larry Levis had some beautiful books. Elegy is a stunning book I recommend to everybody who can read, and even those who can't. And that's like a tacky recommendation. But and then also he has Winter Stars, a book that I read pretty continuously. It's a beautiful book. So Larry Levis is a poet, and from this poem he wrote called Elegy with a Bridle in Its Head, which is a specific poem from that book, Elegy. And so if I was doing research on this book, that'd be an excellent, excellent place to start, right? Let me understand this poem by Larry Levis, and arguably, I might have a better, that's how you get rid of the fan, you just turn the screen. You might have a better sense of, right, what this book is actually trying to do. The quote itself says, "Who among the numberless you have become desires this moment, which comprehends nothing more than loss and fragility and the fleeing of flesh." So, without the whole poem, right, this is going to be a hard thing to understand. So I do recommend, reading that poem if you want to have a better sense of this one. But what I do find in this particular thing in my notes here that I have written off to the side, the words that I'm seeing, right, are first of all, this moment, okay? This moment and desire. Who among the numberless that you have become desires this moment, okay, which comprehends nothing more. So this moment, he says, comprehends nothing more than loss, which is negative, fragility, which is negative in a lot of sense, it's just a kind of breakingness, but it's not necessarily bad, right? It just means that it's delicate. So loss, fragility, and the fleeing of the flesh, which is not a particularly literal thing. The fleeing of the flesh, right? What does that even mean? To me, it sounds like an image of death, right? To be losing of the flesh, to flee it. And if you think about this in a kind of like Calvinistic sense, of a sense of saying like that we have a body and we have a soul and they're kind of at odds with one another, that if we can get rid of the flesh, which is where like all of our temptations come from and all of our issues of, like, if you want to use a very religious term, sin, right? It's about the flesh. So it says we all want this moment, right? But we all desire this moment, but it's also a moment that's full of loss and fragility and the desire to leave the actual body. So she's giving us a lot to think about before we even begin looking at the poems. And I hope that some of that, hopefully, is clarifying a little bit of what she's trying to do. What I'm going to do in the next video, in just a moment, is to look at the poem on page 4 entitled "During the Impossible Age of Everyone." And I'll try to work my way through that and see what you think about those ideas, hopefully in some responses. So that'll be video 1 for the evening, and I hope everything's going well. Please contact me with questions.